All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Joanne Brunn. I'm with Accelerant, but these are the people you really want to hear from. So with no further ado, let's get started. So Brad McCormick is the Vice President for Business Services and College Facilities at John A. Logan College. Brad, would you please tell us a bit about yourself and your college, please?
Wow. I wasn't prepared for the college piece I have down, but I've been a chief business officer for 17 years, two different community colleges, both of them relatively small in the grand scheme of community college sizes. So had some history with the budgeting process through the chief business officer lens. 26 years of community college experience in total, but in different places. I'm a rehabbed financial aid officer. We have an operating budget of about $30 million, $55 million total budget. And like many people, declining enrollment, state funding that's dropped off by $6 million over the last 6 years or so. So we're fighting that and moving to more of a zero-based budgeting approach a few years ago, which led us ultimately into some of the choices we've made, which I know we'll get into later on in the presentation. So that's me.
Okay, thank you, Brad. All right, and now from San Juan College, we have Russ Litke, who's the Vice President for Administrative Services, and Steve Miller, who's the Interim Controller. So Russ, would you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about San Juan, please?
Wow, introduce myself. How far do you want me to go back? I've got a lot of stories. No. I've actually, probably not like a lot of you in the room, I've only been in higher ed for 5 years. All 5 of those years have been at San Juan College. San Juan College, a good medium-sized college in the Four Corners area, up in the northwest corner of New Mexico. Our enrollment hovers around 5,000 FTE. And we're having the same problem, I imagine everyone is. Budget has been declining the last 2 or 3 years. I just went online to see if I could see a current report. We don't have one yet for today, but from last Friday's report, our enrollment was actually up 1.34%. So we'll see how that holds. So that's encouraging, but it's always a challenge to budget with declining enrollment. We haven't seen a drop in our appropriations coming from the state yet, but they threatened us this year and then allowed us to stay steady with where we received last year. So it could be coming for us. A large portion of our revenue also comes from local taxes. Property taxes are fairly stable, but we also get from production tax in the natural gas industry. When natural gas prices drop, our revenue drops significantly. So we're down just in that part of revenue, probably about 80% from the high of just 7 or 8 years ago.
Okay, thank you, Russ. Steve?
My name's Steve Miller. I've been with San Juan College a little over 2.5 years, but I have almost 20 years in education background, some of that K-12, some of that at a 4-year institution as well.
Okay, very good, thank you. You may have noticed a clock tower theme with the pictures that I grabbed from the different schools. So I wanted to share the clock tower that I look at in Stamford, Connecticut. It's the old town hall. So I was jealous of the clock tower, so I added my own. That's my view out my window. My name is Joanne Brunn. I'm the CEO of Accelerant. My background is in financial software, so I've been working within the computer side and the finance side for many years. I have an MBA in finance and also a PhD in human sciences. Interestingly enough, where I went to get my doctorate at Saybrook University is a client of Accelerant through the TCS education system, so I'm very proud of that. And Bill Alderton, who you all know, is our Vice President of Sales. He works out of the California office. So let us begin. So just sort of an overview of who we are. Accelerant provides a cloud-based budgeting, forecasting, and reporting solution designed with an easy-to-use interface that we believe makes a very complex process and often very painful process much more accessible for all users, both finance users and end users. We serve those institutions who really value collaborative environments as a way to engage their employees, empower those employees to make informed decisions so that the strategic objectives of the institution can be met. So some of you might have seen our Excel Hell cartoon campaign. So we know that budgeting can be a painful process. We try to make light of it a little bit by using some humor. So here's a gentleman, let's just figure out what cell isn't linking correctly instead of budgeting to strategy. So you all know that it can be painful. So what we have is a purpose-built design. We look different on purpose. So we haven't taken away Excel from the finance folks, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but we have much more of a user-centered design with built-in navigation, a step-by-step approach that we believe is much more engaging for the end users. And Steve and Russ and Brad can talk to you about their experiences with this particular approach. Some of our clients in higher ed, we do have corporate clients as well. Most of our clients are higher ed clients. You may see some people there that you recognize, a number of community colleges there as well, and across the country. So here's just some quotes from some of our clients. Dan Brent's moved up into the CFO position at Williams James College, which was formerly the Massachusetts School of Professional Psychology. He's been a client for about 3 years and talking about how it used to take him 3 days to do Excel tasks with budgeting now only takes 3 hours to complete. And the department heads have much greater visibility now than they ever had before. Randy Snyder from Franklin University talks about that he can now focus on the real issues. He's not staying up at 2 a.m. to crunch numbers. I'm sure nobody here is staying up to 2 o'clock in the morning to crunch numbers. And the users can have their own data. They can run their own reports. They can do their own piece. They're really much more informed and engaged in the process. And they have just now acquired 2 other colleges and have all 3 colleges sitting in Budget Pack in separate instances, all rolling up into an enterprise level. So he's made real use out of the tool. And then here's my favorite from Donna Farlow, Union County Community College in New Jersey, unbelievably easy. And just recently, BPM Partners, who's an independent authority in this particular area, voted us the one to watch for outstanding usability, customer service, and quick implementation. And we're really proud of that because it was our clients who actually voted us in. Okay. So I'll just do a little bit about employee engagement, and then we'll get into the details of the panelists. So what does budgeting have to do with employee engagement anyway? It takes the right team to put an intelligent budget together and execute the plan. And evidence shows that engaged employees are much more committed to the company's vision. So we believe that budgeting is much more of a communication process than a mechanical process. And collaborative budgeting really is a communications process. Leadership communicates the plan, objectives and goals, and then the budgeting managers, who really are the experts in their particular area, know what they need to do for that upcoming year to build the most effective budget in conjunction with the strategy. And although it's mostly a bottoms-up approach that leads to budgets that are much more achievable, of course, there's top-down controls in software to make sure that people can't go, kind of color outside the lines too much. There's a lot of controls, but the bottoms-up approach they found in research really creates budgets that are much more achievable. It's also better for morale. Because employees sort of expected to achieve what they predict in their budgets. Because they control their budgets, they know that they want to achieve them at the end of the day. They own their own numbers, so you don't tend to hear that's not my number when you have Excel spreadsheets flying around and people don't know what they've handed you, and I don't know where that number came from. So people take much more accountability for their decisions, which leads to a much stronger sense of connection and commitment to the organization. So 4 main benefits for collaborative budgeting approach is increased engagement. So people have to work together more. So there's more teamwork, cohesiveness, and trust, much more transparency in the organization, which lends itself to a higher level of trust. There's increased motivation. So people are much more likely to enjoy working on a budget that they've been involved in setting, rather than one that's been imposed upon them, because they have ownership of it. They feel proud of it. They know what makes up the numbers. Forecasts are much, much better, because people who are doing that job on a day-to-day basis are likely to have a much better idea of what can be done and what's likely to happen. So the forecasting process is much more improved, and you get better results overall, because the budget manager is likely better able to control the cost than anybody else in the organization. Okay, so let's move on to our panelists now and get them engaged. So, Brad, if I could start with you, if you could just talk to us a bit about what your budget process looked like prior to 2 years ago. And maybe I can set that up a little bit by saying that 2 years ago, Stacy Buckingham from your organization, as well as Karen King from San Juan, actually were here at CCBO, which I forget, it was in Phoenix at that point? Phoenix. And they actually looked at a video of ours on the way to CCBO, and within 30 days after the conference had both purchased the product. So this is kind of a then and now look at what happened. So I'm asking Brad to start off with what the process looked like 2 years ago, which made them decide to look for a purpose-built budgeting solution. And then if you could wrap up with how you justified your purchase of Budget Pack.
Right. I'm going to step back even 1 year before that, because there was a little bit of a transition. 3 years before, we were using the tools that our chosen ERP software provided to us. And we were in a place, I was hiring a new dean of financial services, and I purposefully had one of the questions with a lot of weight on it for the applicants is, what is zero-based budgeting? What's your experience with that? And how might you use that at this institution? Because we were in a place where I knew we had to go to a very specific line item by line item, what's the money going to be spent for kind of budget environment. And we had not done that historically. Historically at my institution, money was flowing a lot better for many years, as many of us experienced. And the budget document itself, I'll go back maybe 8 years before, was really not a management tool at all. And it was just a guesstimate, and that's about the value that it had. So we had to make some dramatic changes. So we did begin, and Stacy Buckingham, whom you referred to as the person that I hired, we did begin, I will call it a modified zero-based budget system. Certain things like salaries and staffing, human resources pieces, we didn't let the budget officers get their hands on at the time, but had everyone else do it through a spreadsheet process. So we had 60 to 70 budget officers across the institution, all working on spreadsheets. And the way that happens is they modify the spreadsheet template that you sent to them. And so when you get it back, it doesn't work anymore. And all of those things like that. So Stacy was pulling her hair out literally with 60 to 70 spreadsheets that everyone kept changing, even though she would try to lock things down. Some things wouldn't work, or they would send her a new spreadsheet. And so it became very labor intensive. So that brings us to the 2 years. We had to get away from that, but we couldn't get away from the concept of zero-based budgeting or line item specific budgeting. And actually, I'm gonna plug CCBO as a past president right now. One of the benefits of coming was one of the vendors here actually referred us to this product at that time, and so wasn't even in their market space. So began investigating it and looked for something that was built more for what we needed. And the hurdles, the limitations were, at the same time, we had begun a new ERP implementation process. And I remember sitting in a room of CFOs in Illinois. There's a few Illinois folks here. You might remember this. There was a presentation being made by one of the large ERP providers. And the question was asked, I may have asked the question because I was interested at the time, who in the room uses the ERP provider's budget tool in your budgeting process? And I don't think that a single person in the room was actually using the tool, but the ERP provided. They were using other things, spreadsheets, other partners. And so I knew that was not going to be a solution for us. I didn't think going into the future. So now I'm having to justify why I would buy another software tool to a board who already had spent a large amount of money on an ERP and would not understand why, if you spent this many millions, you couldn't produce a budget. And so that was the challenge that I faced at that point in time. And so we got through that and are in a much better place. But maybe that answers our questions.
Mm-hmm. That's fine. Russ, would you like to talk about your story at San Juan?
First, I'd like to ask everyone a question. How many of you out there use Excel for budgeting? Not everybody. Well, that's amazing. I thought we'd have more hands go up. I've been in accounting over 30 years. Have always used Excel for budgeting. Have always been looking for that budgeting tool that would work beyond Excel. Excel it's always worked, but it's not the most effective way to do a budget. At San Juan College, when I arrived there 5 years ago, the previous vice president had built this Excel workbook that was just horrendous. No instructions. So when he left and I took over, no written instructions. Here's this workbook with over 100 worksheets in it. Formulas everywhere. Can't even find where you input data. You look at a formula and it links you to another, 8 other formulas, which link you to 13 other formulas. And I mean, it was a monster to try and decipher. I feel I did all right with that the first couple of years. Then Karen King came in as controller, and I brought her to CCBO, and she just did not want to deal with that monster of a spreadsheet. So she got, when she looked at budget pack here at CCBO, she was all over it quick because we were already into our budget cycle. So she wanted it purchased and on-site immediately. In between myself doing the budget and Karen King, we had another controller for a short time who also didn't want to deal with this monster of a workbook. And he was a whiz with Excel, but he used pivot tables. So he set up a completely new system using pivot tables in Excel. So always used Excel, always been looking for a good budgeting tool. And I've been in my career, only 5 years in higher ed, I've been in a lot of different industries. I've never used the same ERP system twice. And I've never found an ERP system that includes a good budgeting tool. So that's my experience.
Russ, could you add a little bit about how you were able to justify the purchase of Budget Pack?
It really wasn't that expensive. It's fairly affordable, at least for our college, and the cost wasn't as much a factor as what it was going to do for us, how it was going to help us do our budgets. So we really looked at trying to simplify and better the way we were doing our budgets. One thing that we liked about it and like about it is the ability to include all of our budget monitors. We're still striving to improve our budget process, but we want to be transparent. Everybody wants their hands in it. Likewise, we were sending out spreadsheets. So when we had this 100 worksheets in a workbook, we'd send them their one worksheet for them to update. And then when it came back, links were broken and it was, here again, difficult to come back. So it's a much easier tool to enable all of our budget monitors, of which we have about 100, roughly speaking, budget monitors. So it allows all of them to get their hands into it, feel it, touch it, update it, see it, put in requests very easily. And so for Karen King, the option of trying to figure out how to do the budget with 2 different options that we had used in the past 2 years in Excel, or going through Budget Pack that she found here, For her, it was an easy decision and wasn't difficult for me to approve that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Russ. So let's move on. And Steve, I'm going to get you involved in a moment. So let's take a look at what this looks like in practice. So everyone has a particular hierarchy in their organization. Everybody's hierarchy is different. You want to do different things in reporting and workflow. So often we've found that the general ledger structure of how things relate to each other is not necessarily the same way that you want to relate things in a budgeting fashion. So we know that everybody is unique and different. So what you're going to look at is actually two different views of what San Juan's organization, part of it organization looks like, and John A. Logan's organization looks like. So this one is a portion, because it's much longer than this, of the San Juan hierarchy. So this is the departmental side, if you will. Anything that you see in blue is a roll-up unit. So that means that that's where you can have consolidated reports print out, or that's where the approval level takes place. And the parts that are in black with the kind of the longer numbers in front, that's where the budget preparation takes place. So Steve, could you talk a little bit about how your organization is structured and why you set up the hierarchy the way you did, and if you did anything different than the way the general ledger was set up?
We basically followed what we were doing previously and just built it, in line with how we had approached it before. So, it's pretty set up basically as far as the president, vice presidents, and then everything that falls underneath those areas roll up into all those areas. So it follows that for the most part, how we were doing things before, to try and not make it easier for us when we built it, but then also for the end users, so that they're not seeing a whole big change in the process.
So Steve, to follow up on that, so we have student activities kind of called out in that section there. Before with Excel, were the heads of those departments, student activities, talent search, edge, et cetera, able to pull a view of the departments that rolled up into them very easily, or do you find they're working with their numbers differently now?
So, yeah, well, they would only get their little piece of it, and they couldn't see anything else. And then really the VPs necessarily wouldn't see the whole big picture as easily as it can be provided with this system. So, sending out an Excel spreadsheet to all these different folks, and then tracking it and knowing who's returned it and who hasn't. That's another feature that's nice about this, is you can see where it's at in the status of things. So you can look and see so-and-so hasn't even looked at their information yet.
So-and-sos, plural.
So it's in that aspect, because if you send out an email with their Excel spreadsheet, and you have to track that some way coming back, do you forget, you forget who's doing what. You have to send them an email reminder. This way it's a global look. You can see where everything's at, as far as that goes. And so you really can see where everything is at in the budgeting process. So you can then make targeted phone calls, that kind of stuff, to folks to say, budget's due in a week, you need to get your part updated.
Yes. We want to get that on the mic so that we can hear you. So, Bill, if you don't mind.
So this has come up recently for us as well. You guys hear me? And what I worry about is the budget system has an identifier that rolls all student activities up. And yet in your GL or your source system, do you have to have that same hierarchy in order to have the actual information report back in that same way? Or are you guys using the budget number as the unique identifier between the links? Does it make sense what I'm asking?
I think we're using the actual so that it corresponds. So it's a direct relationship. So those are our account numbers for that department. So it relates to our ERP system, so that when we get the budget created in this system, we can upload that information into our ERP system.
Right.
But at the same time, our ERP system doesn't allow us to roll it up by vice president or president. So this allows us then to give those reports in that fashion much easier.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the roll-up doesn't matter. It's just the base part of it that matters. It has to be the same. Okay. So let's take a look at how different John A. Logan's hierarchy looks. So again, there's a president level and VP level. And Brad, maybe you can talk just a little bit about what you found to be some of the benefits of the way that your hierarchy's been set up and the data you've been able to get out of that.
Well, I'll say the hierarchy changed actually after this tool came on the scene. It made us rethink some things, as any software implementation will do. So we had some accounts that previously we had looked at one individual as the budget officer, and maybe it was just history based. We've never challenged that, or we've never thought through that, or why is it reporting to that person? Well, you have to think through those decisions when you're doing the setup for this. And there is some work out there on the setup. So our hierarchy changed a little bit, or the structure changed a little bit as we went through. I'm really curious why you happen to choose athletics. Were you trying to torture me as part of this presentation? Public
Not on
flogging
purpose.
or something like that. I did note when I was looking through, for example, in the past before this, you see postseason playoff on the right. You see region. We had previously budgeted some things like that, tucked them away into the VP of Student Services budget, because we really didn't want the athletic director to know we had money for postseason play, because he would always budget as if they were going to go to the Nationals every year and then transfer those dollars out when they didn't. So it caused us to change some things, nothing in particular to this, but just the process of having to go through and think about why is this person the budget officer for that, caused us to make some good decisions in setting up our structures.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Brad. So what may not be obvious behind the scenes is every one of these units here or departments has a person who's directly responsible, and then other people who could be also responsible for parts of that.
And I would like to add something to the discussion just previously, that one of the real benefits is, you would send the spreadsheets out and then you don't know what's going on until it comes back. You can actually watch the budget process and see how it's evolving behind the scenes. So not only do you know whether they've done anything on the budget, but you get a little advanced peek about what's coming, because you can see into it from the accounting office and see what's being built and constructed behind the scenes. So.
Okay, so let's take a look now at what replaces the Excel templates. So here's our budget navigation map. This is what replaces the Excel templates. It looks very different. Often when people look at this, they look at this and say, what is that? But I'll describe a little bit of it, and then Steve, if you could talk about how your users have adapted to it and work with it. So on the top is 2 navigation lines. The piece in the yellow is where the perspective is. So it's a particular company or San Juan College, particular department. You see the version draft 1, so people can have multiple versions of the budget as they're going through, or round 1, round 2. The budget status, that's what Steve's been talking about. Has it been started? Has it been completed? Has it been signed off? Has it been approved? If there's headcount associated with the unit, it'll show up there, although you can turn that off for people who don't have security to see that. Then on the right is version comparison box that the college decides what versions they want there, so that you can compare as you go to those other numbers. So if there's a target budget or a forecast number, as a person's building their budget, they can keep checking as they go line by line or overall for the unit. And then what you see on the bottom, and this is a very small budget navigation map, but what we call stacks and sections. Usually there's a number of accounts under each one. That's all custom to each school. And this is the way that the user goes through and actually budgets for the annual amount, which we'll look at in a moment. So this one happens to be for the, is this student athletics?
Student activities.
The student activities, which, let me just pop to this one for a moment, is different than the machine shop. So depending upon what accounts the person has to budget for, and we do this all automatically behind the scenes, they'll have a different budget navigation map. Some of those accounts can be wide open, discretionary, and some of them can be controlled by you. So things like FICA and Medicare and things like that would most likely have a calculation behind the scenes. There could be ones that are restricted that they can't see. The headcount and salary stack appears here because that person has authority to do the headcount portion of their budget. So, Steve, you can just talk a little bit about how people were able to relate to this and how you find that working for you.
Sure. For the most part, they have no control over the salary piece of this. So the way that we did on this system is we locked that down so that they couldn't make changes to that. But we wanted them to be able to view that information. So they can see who they have in their department. And we use that as a verification process as well. So we wanted to make sure that we had everything coded properly and associated correctly within our two systems. So if they looked at that and they said, well, why do I have this person? They're not in my department. They could let us know so that we could get it corrected. But we wanted them to be able to see all that information and know what their salary impact was, but we didn't want them making changes. We didn't want them requesting new employees, that kind of stuff, because we have a different process for that. And then most of the employee benefit piece, most of that we could code in with formulas. So that was a way to populate that information easily. And then the rest of it is where they actually have, typically if there's money available, where they would have an impact to their budget. So they can make changes to their operational funding.
Okay, and just as a point of comparison, here's two maps from John A. Logan. This is the basketball, and I'm sorry to keep torturing you with this, Brad, and performing arts. Also, both of them very different from each other. They can be very small. They can have 100 accounts in them. It all depends upon what department is working on the budget. So, Brad, did you want to add anything about the different way the departments are set up? I know you're not usually down at this level of detail.
I see a lot of these structures, though, with the part that I perform with in it. One thing that I think is important, there's a performing arts here, but you throw those typical spreadsheets at your department chair for humanities, and their eyes start spinning around in their head. They don't do that. When you have a graphical representation of what a budget is, it meets with a complete different receptivity in certain places in your college, because they don't do those things well. They do pictures and graphics and those other types of things. So that's one of the benefits that I've experienced, or our staff, our faculty, or administrators have experienced. Those people that aren't comfortable in those other environments are a little more comfortable in this kind of environment. And we've talked some about individual institutions' decisions on whether you want to allow salaries, human resources to be part of it. You can, and you may hit on this later, but we're at the stage now where we're starting to think through the next phase of development for us, and that will be likely where people will be able to make a request for human resources, but they will pick from some defined choices. Where, how many calls do you get? What's the total fringe benefit cost on a faculty member? Because someone's trying to come up with a budgetary rationale for something. But you can define those within the product, and then people can choose them almost like a shopping cart. I think I would like one of these, and at least the numbers are right when they come into a budget, and then you can evaluate later whether you want to use or accept that proposal. But
Okay. Thank you, Brad. Okay. So let's look at the various budget methods. When you think about Excel and locking down spreadsheets, you have that one cell to put numbers in. And as Brad pointed out, a lot of people think more in pictures and designs than in kind of the row and column. So what our input looks like for an annual amount is this screen. And there's a guided approach, step 1, step 2. Step 1, choose from 6 different budget methods from the most simplest to the most complex. And step 2, which is optional, but you can force that as well, is the notes or justification that Brad and I talked a little bit about yesterday that he can add some more commentary to. And for each particular expense or revenue account, the end user can decide which method they're using. It could just be a percent increase. It could be an annual amount. It could be line item detail. It could be drivers. But they get to decide with the guidance of the finance team what might work best for different accounts. So, Steve, I know you're probably closest to this working with the users. Do you find them using certain methods more than others? Have things changed over the 2 years?
I would say it's more based on directives. So, for example, we had a 3% budget reduction in their operating budgets. So we asked them to go in here and take that 3% from their budgets. So they use the percentage in a lot of cases. In some cases, they have the freedom to say, well, we want to take our 3%, but we don't want to take it from this area. We want to take, 5% from this area. And so they can make that change so that at least ways they had some discretion on where they took their funding sources. And that gave them, more freedom in deciding that, as opposed to taking a flat 3% across the board out of everything. So it did allow that. They could come up with, they did a calculation, they could say, well, 3% would be this much, and they could put in a flat dollar amount as well in the section instead. But the system will let you do the calculations just for you there. And you can play with that. And so, well, what if I take 2% here and 3% here, and see what we get at the end? So it's been more based on directives as far as the budget situation that we've been in, determining how it gets used at this point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And just going to talk a little bit about the line item detail. This is a way to almost do, I don't want to say sub-account, but it's detail below the account line. So if you wanted to add 5 or 6 items, what makes up the $20,000 number, you can put that in details and it'll print out in reports also. So in addition to notes. So one of the things actually Brad and I were talking about yesterday, and Russ, if you could comment on this as well. Brad, you were talking about how at first not everyone used notes, but then the second year that they did.
Yeah, we're probably seeing more of a move toward the line item detail. And in the first year of use, we had a lot of training. We told a lot of folks, you need to use as many details as you can, because that's the way your supervisors on up the chain will know what you're doing. You still had those that still wanted to do the percentage piece option and just apply that. And then the second year, people began to learn that by putting the details in, it was less likely that their budget was going to get cut. And it wasn't simply because they did or did not put details in. It was because at the end of the day, it all rolls up to some desk, whether it's yours or another, that says, you know what, we haven't met the goals. Now we got to make some more reductions. And democracy only goes so far in that. And so when I'm in finality looking at it and say, how am I doing in contractual services? How am I doing these other areas? And then you pull up a department, and we can get into reporting later, and you see they put in all this detail, and it's like, I can't cut that. That's very well supported. I understand what they're doing. Move on to the next one. And so it started to help that way. And I think it's building the momentum within the college for people to understand the more detail they provide, the more secure their budget becomes along the process.
Mm-hmm.
We use a lot of line item detail.
Russ, do you want to add anything to that? Have you seen any change over the 2 years?
We're doing things pretty much the same way. We encourage putting in notes for each line item, and it helps secure that they're going to see their request. If they just say, hey, I need more money here, and they don't tell us why, there's a good chance they're not going to get it. But if they can put in a reason why, and it's a valid reason, one thing that we're also we're still kind of working towards this, is we want a way to track how much money we're spending on each one of our strategic objectives. And so we're using this. So, we're trying to train our budget monitors. If you put in a note that says, this is for a strategic objective 3.3E, okay, now that means a lot to us as we look at it, and chances are we're going to let you have that. So we encourage the use of notes just to help support any requests for increases.
We see even down to the level of, in a staff development line item, itemizing, like this one says NACUBO, but if this were a staff development item, itemizing the conference, the name of the conference, how many people are going, and the approximate cost per person. It gets into that kind of detail. So when we're looking at the professional development piece, I look at it sometimes and say, you know what, that's too many people going to that conference. Let's pull that back by this, and we know how much to reduce it by.
Okay, thank you. So I want to actually skip over the drivers. The drivers is a global assumption. A few of our clients use it. It can be things like student fees or enrollment numbers that then they can use to help inform their budget, but you provide the number for them. That's another method. But we have something fairly unique, we feel, in the industry called an action pack, and it's a way for users to pull together multiple accounts for an initiative or a campaign or a program. And if it doesn't get approved, they can just hit delete and it'll strip the numbers out from the general budget. So this is what an action pack report looks like. And this is from our test system, so I didn't want to pull anybody's data for this, but this is something for a symposium and President's Initiative. And you can see that there are multiple different line items and dollar amounts. You could also have notes as well. So last year, Brad, you told our former CEO, Ted Dacko, that budget pack is actually too good because people are submitting all these special initiatives, and now you've got all this stuff going on. So it actually worked too well.
I think in the first year I had that experience, it was a concern to me because it unleashed everyone's wildest imaginations, and they came forward in the budget process, and it was just one of those things we had to go through. And not everything got approved. But I do want to mention on the budget packs, and I'm looking at how much is left to go, so we don't have a lot of time.
Right.
In the budget packs themselves, one of the nice features for budget officers is even if your budget pack is not approved, and I'll let you explain what's involved in that, it doesn't blow it away. It can be retained and saved for next year's consideration. And so you save work on the part of the budget officer. It's not wasted work that they just have to go recreate another year if they want to.
Okay, right. So you can pull all this through so you never lose the history of it. So a couple of things with reports, and I'll go a little bit quickly here because I want to get to the end with the benefits piece. There are a number of reports straight out of the box, different kinds of P&L reports, monthly, year-to-date, quarterly, by different views, as well as a series of headcount reports, consolidating reports, asset reports, etc. And these are all, depending upon the user security, they can just go in and click on that and they'll just see what they're supposed to see. So it puts all that right in the hands of the user. So for example, here's the top of a P&L report from the student activity fees in San Juan, and they get to see if they have any notes there. And then this is a consolidated view. So here's all of student activities with the departments that roll up into that. So now the head of the department can just hit a button and see all the detail below in one report in addition to seeing it in details. I'm just going to do a little bit quickly here. And this is a report, a year-to-date report from John Logan, again, specific to that department. So when the department produces reports, they just see what's intended for them to see and nothing more, so they're not confused with excess information. They can also do a year-to-date report. So that's the roll-up, athletics, and this is the sub-area, men's basketball, to continue the torture. Okay. Then we have monthly reports. So that's something Russ and I were just talking about, that neither school at this point has rolled out the monthly spreading feature. It's behind the scenes anyway, so you can still get it, but you can use the monthly spreading to really tweak where you want the dollars to be. So it'll automatically default to an actuals from last year. But if you have something new this year and it goes in the month of July, you can plug that number in. And now you can really do monthly reports month by month. So no, that's something that probably both schools are considering. So it's kind of an evolution. as they started and the system grows, then they can turn on more and more features. So the monthly report, headcount detail, there's a lot of information on the headcount side. Again, by security, new hires, people leaving. You can do benefits by employee. It shows all of that and the cash flow impact. We have an assets module as well. And this is the budget status report that Steve was talking about, where by looking at the report here, you see those Ys in there. At any given point in time, you can see where people are in the process. So there's an interactive way to do it and a report. And you also get the dollars to date. So Brad talked about anytime you want to view in and see where things are so far, you can hit reports and it'll give you that real-time look. So not to forget the finance folks, we do have integration with Excel. And I don't know whether, Steve, you're using this or Stacy uses this, Brad, but any report can be dumped to Excel. And we have what we call a My Excel so that you can hook into the database directly. So if you wanted to do quick analysis or pivot tables, or you wanted to do some custom reports with some charts and graphs in Excel, Excel is what you're used to using. So that's the method that we give you, and you can manipulate the data however you'd like. So Brad or Russ, if you have anything you'd like to add to that piece, are you using that feature at all?
We used it. We use it some to look at that. And more so, that's the way that we would download stuff out of Budget Pack into Excel, be able to review it, make sure it's accurate. You can make changes to that, and then upload it back into Budget Pack. So it makes it very easy to make changes in a mass, as opposed to changing things one by one. So that's more where we've used that feature of it, pulling it in and out.
I don't, in my role, I don't see a lot of that occurring. It is occurring. I'm not interacting with it. What I ask for often, though, is the data to be downloaded into Excel and then sent to me in that fashion, because I'm preparing reports for the board and structures that might not be set up yet in the tool. So I do receive the data in Excel format.
Okay, thank you. So we have two other main pieces I want to get to. One is sort of the current process for getting the budget set up, rolling it out, how long that takes now versus before, and then a bit about the benefits. So maybe we'll just ask Steve to do this piece, since you're probably much more hands-on as the administrator, in terms of how long does it take right now to get the whole budget set up and rolled out versus before.
As far as that goes, it's fairly quick. I would say, like I said, I'm new in this particular role, so I had pieces of it. And as we talked before, the process was quite long. I mean, can you imagine sending out 100 emails, attaching the appropriate Excel spreadsheet to that email? Once you've loaded into it, all the users, they have a username and a password that they log into the system, and they can see the data. They can see their information right there. They go in and make their changes. So once you've got that all there, it's ready to go. And they can do it 24/7 whenever they have time to sit down and look at their budget and make those changes. So as far as that piece of it, it makes it really nice. They're not waiting on something else. Once it's there, they're not waiting on anybody else to do their part.
Okay.
And they do use it throughout the year, so that they go back and they look. Sometimes I don't want them to go back and look, but they do go back in there and see, well, this is what was supposed to be my budget, and then they'll compare that to what is then in our ERP system to make sure that they match. And if they don't, they want to know why, because that's what they submitted and put through. And so it's a good tool for them too to do that as well.
When you say you don't, sometimes it'd be better for them not to look. One of the things I have heard since we started using this tool is someone now has proof that they did not budget for that. Because before I want to say, well, you should have budgeted that, or how would I have known whether they did, because the line item detail wasn't there. Now they can come back and say, I did not budget for this, is what I budgeted for. And it's right here. It's itemized. So.
Okay. And just a little bit about the top-down controls. In the same way that we don't expect the non-financial users to really gravitate towards Excel, we don't expect finance folks to gravitate towards being a SQL database expert. So all of the way that you interact with the system from the back end is either through Excel spreadsheets or table-driven. And I think, Steve, we trained you. The training took about 4 hours, and you had a bit because you were working with it before with Karen, but really to get, into it and understand all the pieces is about a 4-hour training. So we try to make it very straightforward for the administrators as well. Just a bit about implementation, because I want to get to the end, is that our implementation takes anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes it takes longer. It really depends upon what's going on the client side in terms of being able to grab data out of the GL, other projects that happen, auditors show up, vacations happen, things like that. We've done it in a week. With the Southern California University of Health Sciences. We did it in 3 weeks with William James College. So it can be a very compressed, very focused. On average, it's about 8 weeks. End user training, it takes about a 60 to 90 minute session to train the users. And if Steve or Russ or Brad, if you want to comment on the end user sort of adaptation of this method versus Excel, did they adapt easily to it? Is it something that you feel you have to retrain every year? How does that work for you?
I would say that you need to retrain every year. Not so much because it's difficult, but I guess we're working towards maybe trying, a year-round budgeting process. So, but it still is kind of a one-time, once-a-year kind of process. So when you're not in a system all the time, you forget bits and pieces of it. So more so of not a full training, but a refresher kind of thing. This is how it works. This is what you need to do. Also, sometimes, the directives have changed. So you may need to retrain them or give them information as to what they need to do based on the directives that are coming from, the top or that kind of thing. And then you're going to have turnover as well. So you're always going to have to train those new users that are coming on. But it's web-based, it's simple. It's what people are, it's not a foreign system that people aren't accustomed to, clicking on things and getting to where they do, just like they're going anywhere else to buy, something online or that kind of stuff. So.
And we generally offer a couple different training workshops and just open it up to whoever would like to come. So if people feel they're confident, they can remember it, they don't bother coming. If there's new people or if they want a refresher, they don't remember what they did 8 months ago or something, they can come, and it's up to them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so changes in the budgeting process then versus now. Brad, we talked about this a bit yesterday. If you could talk about the amount of the revenue, the extra,
right,
the contingency money.
One of the things this has allowed me to do is reduce the general contingency that is in the budget. Prior to this, and going back many years, we would have, when I first came to this institution, as high as 8% of the total operating funds in contingency. So we kept chopping that down, chopping it down. And with the tool, now we've been able to get down to a total operating fund contingency of $190,000 and a $30 million budget. And that probably can come down a little more. And it's because we're accounting for there's not so much what might happen. It's more planned, specific dollars. And the other thing about the specificity of the dollars, people are beginning to support their justification, not with just estimates. They'll have copies of proposals that they have solicited ahead of time, or they'll have documented prices of things that they'll use as part of their basis for their budget justification. So I'm just peeling back contingency, and it's helping a lot just to make sure that the budget is balanced on the front side, not balanced with a caveat that we don't spend the contingency, and just not having to do those kinds of explanations. Other than that, the other change that I see is just the time between the budget officers finishing their budget and us being able to produce a budget is compressed a lot because we've eliminated all that data work on the backside in the business office.
Okay. Thank you. So just kind of a wrap up overall, Russ, if you could take this one first, have you seen things improved either at your level, organization as a whole, anything, unanticipated?
I think overall we've seen improvements, definitely. The one suggestion that I'd have for all of you, it's one thing that we're still struggling with a little bit, is depending on how your institutions work, I'd recommend getting complete buy-in from your president before you go this route. Our president hasn't completely bought into it, so sometimes our struggle comes from the top when we're trying to utilize Budget Pack the way it's intended, the way it's developed, the way we want to, because we don't have support from the top. So we're still somewhat working with our president and helping her to understand why we need to do it this way. So that's one recommendation I'd have for everyone, is to make sure your president understands fully what you're trying to do, what this product will do for you, and why she needs to, or he or she, your president, needs to buy into this. So one recommendation for everyone.
Okay, so let me just wrap up, and then I know we're just about on time. One of the things that we do at Accelerant is we get pretty much the majority of our enhancement requests and roadmap from our clients. So they're the ones who are working with it. They're the ones who sometimes say, if you could just do this, it would just make my life so much easier. Or when are you going to do this? So we put those all into a roadmap, and then that's where we get our best ideas. So the pieces that we just released, we have a scenario modeling piece where you can just go under the hood and model a whole bunch of different scenarios throughout the year. There's new collaboration features for attaching files. So if you want to put your strategic objectives right there for everyone to have, it's there. We'll be doing detailed forecasting, so forecasting with headcount, as well as a very integrated multi-year budgeting. And at the end of the year, drill through to transaction level detail so that they'll be able to click on a button and see what makes up their invoices all the way through. So I want to thank the panel, Steve and Russ and Brad. You've been fabulous, and open it up for questions.
So how does that? Amber Hill with Northland Pioneer College in Holbrook, Arizona. How does Budget Pack integrate to your financial reporting for your comparative reports? How do you get all that into your ERP? Or do you not? And if you don't, I don't understand why.
At my college, we certainly do, and we upload it not just one time. We may upload it a number of times in the budget process so that we can then run certain queries. And like, for example, we have some particular format of some budget documents or treasurer's reports or financial reports that go to the board that are object-based, function-based, just various scenarios. So we might upload it at one point in time, do some reporting. We could probably develop those reports out of this system, but we just haven't yet. And then we'll continue to tweak the budget. But at the end of it, it's certainly an uploading into that system. And then we are not using Budget Pack after the creation of the budget for continued modifications through the year. SQL. Yeah, there's an interface developed to be able to do that, and it goes both ways. So when we get ready to kick off our budget process, and we have a meeting with all of our budget officers and say, here are our broad parameters this year, and we populate the fields in there in advance, and we make some decisions on how we're going to do that. There may be some fields we populate with specific numbers that are already there. There's other budget groupings, account numbers that we wipe out to zero. And for a starting point. Now we give them history, and you've got the choice of looking at various forms of history. You can give them a calendar year history, you can give them a fiscal year, a year to date, whatever you want to show them. But some cases we may start their budget with a number, and then they can modify that. Some cases we start it with a zero. Just depends on the line item.
And what are your ER pieces?
We use Colleague, Lucian.
Or Genzabar CX and going to JX.
Are you data still?
It's Colleague now. It's DataTel, but they've changed to Colleague. So, but yeah.
Any other questions?
Does the system allow for historical budget reporting? And if so, can you have the ability to go as an extra part of your budgeting information to be able to run comparative reports and look at historical trends?
Any data that's loaded into the system, and you probably have a number of years of actuals, a number of years of prior budgets, plus this round of budget, you can compare and get variances on any combination.
They go back a number of years as well to the implementation process of the historical budget information to compare between what was 10 years ago and what it is today.
Yeah, I don't know how many years you've gone back to load.
We just loaded the current year that we were starting. Well, the prior year, when we started, we loaded the prior year and then what we were working on. So that's all the history that we have in the system since we started using it. So, 10 years from now, yes, there'll be all that data in there. But we chose just to start.
And you can take the time to put in as many years back as you'd like.
And I think beyond just the budget, Libby, is that we take the step of doing actuals too. And so we're putting our actuals in there as well. So when we go back and we try to build a basis for anything, we've got the budget history as well as the actuals too, because we factor that into things we ask our budget officers to do.
Bill, question over here.
Budget monitoring throughout the year. Do you use this tool or
We do not use this tool presently.
We don't use it necessarily throughout the year to give them reports. We use another reporting system that pulls it out of our ERP system to give them budget and actuals. We're currently not putting a whole lot of actuals back into Budget Pack. It is a feature that is there, and probably at some point, if we really want to leverage the technology, we would need to start doing that.
We're using our current ERP system to do the ongoing monitoring.
Okay, any other questions? All right. Thank you so much, Steve and Russ and Brad, to take time out of the conference to do this for us and for everyone here. I hope you found it informative and enjoyable. And what was the comment that you made, Brad, about it was wildly imaginative?
Wild imaginations.
How often do you hear that in a budget session? So there you go. Thank you.